Hey everyone, I hope everybody's doing okay, but I would like to take some time today and look at some of the stocks that have taken an absolute beating during this pandemic. I'm sure a lot of people's investments are hurting right now, but we have to look on the bright side. This is a great opportunity that usually only comes around once in a decade. And if we can make some smart investments during these uncertain times, it can pay off significantly in the future. So do your homework and find some great companies to invest in. Today I would like to take a look at some of the cruise line companies. With no one going out and traveling, they have really taken a serious beating, dropping around 3/4 of their price. They are going through some tough times right now, and if they can get through this, an investment right now can pay off handsomely in the future. First, as a disclaimer, I just want to say I'm not a financial advisor, so please do your own due diligence before investing. The three cruise line companies I want to take a look at today is Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian Cruise. So right off the bat, I just want to mention that Norwegian Cruise doesn't pay a dividend, and they haven't in the past, but I would assume they would in the future, just because Carnival and Royal Caribbean does. But before we begin, I just want to mention that we don't have any recent earnings report from Royal Caribbean or Norwegian Cruise yet. They aren't reporting until near the end of April or the beginning of May, but we do have a report from Carnival that covers up to the end of February. But what I'm trying to get across here is that the EPS numbers are going to take a big hit, which is going to affect many other numbers such as the PE ratio, the dividend payout ratio. Another thing that I'm going to be expecting to take a hit is their dividends. Because later on, when we take a look at their dividend history, they won't hesitate to stop the dividend payment if they are struggling, and I would totally expect them to in this situation, because it doesn't look like the pandemic is going away tomorrow, and it's going to take a while before people are confident enough to go out and resume their daily lives. So looking at these numbers isn't going to help us a lot right now, as they're not very accurate to what's going on as of now, but I'm hopeful that when this blows over, hopefully they'll be able to recover and resume business like it was before this pandemic. We are just heading to earnings season, so we'll see what our companies have to say. I would like to take a look at some historical data and see how business was like before the pandemic, so hopefully that when this does get better, we can see them slowly get back on track and resume business as normal. So first off, I would like to look at the revenue numbers, and we'll see that in the past several years, they've all been able to grow the revenue numbers nicely, but we see a similar trend among them, upwards, which is good, as we know the sector is growing, but we know they are going to take a big hit this year. We just don't know how badly yet, and how long or if they can recover from it. Next up, when we take a look at the profit numbers, the chart is not quite as nice as the revenue, but we can see that overall in the past 6 years or so, they've all been doing very well growing their profits, but before that we can see that Royal Caribbean has been bouncing back and forth, and Norwegian has just been hovering around the break-even mark. When we take a look at the profit margins, which I know is not a great chart since it doesn't really tell us a clear picture of exactly what the profit margins are, since these numbers include any write-offs they do, because I'm just taking their profits and dividing by the revenues, but it sort of gives us an idea of how well they are doing, and we can see that a similar trend among them, especially in the recent decade. Next up, the earnings per share number. Just remember this number doesn't tell us a lot, since it doesn't really factor in the number of shares outstanding, but what we are looking for is the trend, and we can see that they've all been doing well in the past 6 to 7 years, and really growing the earnings per share number. But one thing I would like to mention that stood out to me was just how much more Royal Caribbean and Norwegian has grown the earnings per share compared to Carnival. So keep that in mind when we take a look at their number of shares outstanding. So right off the bat, before I get into this, I would like to mention why the massive increase in the number of shares for Carnival back in 2003. It was back in 2003 that Carnival merged with P&O Princess Cruises, which then created a lot more share, hence a massive jump up in the number of shares. But since then, they have been slowly buying back their shares and have really ramped up more during the last 4 years. But when we take a look at Royal Caribbean and Norwegian share buyback, it has been nowhere near as much as Carnival's. And if you remember the chart with the earnings per share, we can come to the conclusion that the growth in earnings per share from organic growth is much more significant in Royal Caribbean and Norwegian, as share buyback has contributed much more to Carnival's earnings per share growth than the other two. When we take a look at their yearly dividend, remember that Norwegian doesn't pay a dividend yet, currently, but we can see that in the past, around 2008 and 2009, they won't hesitate to cut or even stop their dividend payment during difficult times. So just because they have been growing their dividends a lot recently, I wouldn't be surprised for them to cut or even stop their dividend payment during difficult times like now. But one thing I would like to note is that back in 2013, for Carnival, they didn't cut the dividend payment. Back in 2012, they did a special one-time payment of 50 cents, so technically it's been flat for those years. When looking at their payout ratio, we can see one outlier point in Royal Caribbean, but if we ignore that one point, we can see that majority of the time they try to keep it under 50%, which is good since it leaves them with money to invest back into the company. But overall, we can see that there are times when they fluctuate more, like back in 2008 to 2012, And again, I would expect it now as well during the coronavirus. When we took a look at dividend growth, we see a very similar trend among them, but overall we see that Royal Caribbean has been growing their dividends much more in the past, and that's probably due to them becoming more profitable. When we take a look at their stock performance, it shouldn't surprise us as that Carnival has been underperforming compared to Royal Caribbean or Norwegian, as they have been much more profitable, where stock buyback has attributed more to Carnival's EPS growth. But overall, we can see that Norwegian and Royal Caribbean stock performance has pretty much mirrored each other. And lastly, when we take a look at their annualized return, we can see that Carnival, to no surprise, doing the worst and Royal Caribbean doing the best. But overall, this chart may look very bad, but that's because of the recent 75% drop in their stock price. But if we were to ignore that recent drop, their annualized return wouldn't be nearly as poor. But overall, in my personal opinion, which one do I like? First, I would probably not choose Norwegian as they are the smallest of the three, and they do have more debt compared to the other two relative to their size, and that's not something I want during uncertain times like now. So that leaves me down with Carnival and Royal Caribbean. But I would probably go with Royal Caribbean just because of the better organic growth, as they're able to grow their business much more compared to Carnival. Let me know down in the comment section below, which one would you choose? I've been going back and forth between Carnival and Royal Caribbean because yes, I like Royal Caribbean more, but it all comes down to survival, because if they can't make it through this, our investment would be worth nothing. And with the Saudis recent acquiring a large stake in Carnival, I'll be lying if it didn't affect my decision. Because of their massive stake in the company, they are less likely to let it go under. But these are just my own personal opinions. I'm not a financial advisor, so please do your own due diligence before investing. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please like and share the video. I really appreciate it because making these videos does take a lot of time to do the research on these companies, and it does really help out the channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure to smash the subscribe button, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.